Hello again. Today we will be talking about the best way to treat your band equipment. Now, I will be cutting later in the video to my actual band room, and that part is specifically really for our band program, though some of the ideas in it are probably something that you'll might want to incorporate into your own band program. But as far as that, let's get started. Now, this guide is particularly for valved instruments such as a trumpet, baritone, euphonium, potentially French horn, though I don't think it's the same idea. This is a bell cover. You'd probably, assuming all goes well, won't need to use this in the future. So for a trumpet, the best way to maintain your instrument is always to keep the playing part, the moving part, moving. You don't want sticky valves or slow recalls. And these are a good instrument, a good idea. For a trumpet and really any valved instrument, tuba, baritone, you want to put the valve oil on the gray area. You don't want to put it up here because it will never get down there. If it does get down there, it'll get down in less. Or you don't want to put it in the holes because that's where your air goes. It'll end up stuck in your spit valve. So yeah, valves and really the moving part of your instrument are the most important to keep in working order. Another part that's not as essential, which is the tuning slide. Tuning slides on trumpets and other instruments like mine, it doesn't move like a trombone would, like a trombone slide would, but that's because it's not meant to do that. It's meant to stay in place, get to a good place and stay in place. Now, because of that, it moves, and you always want it to be able to move, but it doesn't move terribly well. If I were someone else, I would grease it up, probably with something like this. If you're a trombone player and your slide is moving something like this, oil it or get it fixed because there's something very wrong with it. As far as anything else, second valve tuning slide, this part is sometimes a very hard part. For my instrument, for example, it's completely stuck on. It does not come off. It should come off, it does not. On someone I know's instrument, it comes off too easily. So it's a give and take. It's not really a good science. This is a Bach trumpet. Bach. I don't know if that's registering on the camera, but it's a Bach, which is a fairly good trumpet. The only thing that you want to be careful with, and really in general with any trumpet, is how you put it down. Now, a trumpet has three plausible ways for you to place it on the ground. The first and middle acceptable way is on its bell. Now this is, for my trumpet in particular, it's not a good idea because the bell, you can't see it very well, but the bell is curved, so it has a tendency on hardwood to try to fall over by itself. The other way is like that, and some people that don't play a trumpet or don't know in general think that this is wrong, but this is probably the worst way you can do it, and that is again because of the finicky second valve tuning slide. You never want the trumpet resting on the second valve tuning slide. This can get dented, stuck in, or anything else. Another reason is you don't want it resting on this. I mean, there's not enough weight to damage it, and as long as you're not pushing pressure on it, you're probably not going to break it, but you can put unnecessary stress on the solder here, and that can cause it to shift and potentially break. You always want it setting something like that, with all three, with these two sticking out or vertical, the second valve tuning slide sticking out, and the valves sticking upward. You don't want the valves sticking perpendicular to the ground. That is parallel to the ground actually. But yeah, that's the way to do it. Now, inserting a mouthpiece, I have two mouthpieces. You always want to go with the one that's a little bit better. This is a 7C. This is what most people start with. Is a 7C. And this is really the starting thing. You don't need a new instrument, a new mouthpiece unless you really want it. The only thing that this really helps you with is clearness of tone and really better tone up higher. There's really only one other option. There's only two other options and really only one other acceptable option, which is the 3C, which is just, and that just refers to the concavity of the mouthpiece, how much it curves in and how well it directs the sound. I do not have a 3C. I play on a 5C, which is just which is the middle ground between a 7C and a 3C. I play on it because I'm not the best player, but I'm not also the worst player, and I'm fairly good at controlling my tone. It works for me, and really, you don't need to buy a new mouthpiece, but if you do buy a 3C, it's really just worth more and really better in the long run. But you never want to insert like this. You don't want to put it in just like this because it's loose. It'll come straight back out. I did not use any force, and it's not coming out like this, but if you whip it, it may come out. You don't also want to do something like that. That slams it in. That's a good way to get stuck, and then you'll need your band director to take it out again for you. Don't use anything, don't let the band director do this. It's a good way to damage your instrument by trying to bring it out without your hand and using a tool like a grip. That's a good way to damage it because it's metal, but it's hollow. So it crushes fairly easily. I mean, it's not easy for me to crush, but placing a metal against it and pressing down, I may get more results. The best way to do it, and this is really for any mouthpiece, is just to put it in and turn it. That way it's not coming out. You have to turn it again to pull it back out. And yeah. As far as other things, and these are more specific things, as far as mutes. Now, most likely, if you're having a mute at all, it's going to be a straight mute. Now, this is a very, very pristine example of a straight mute because it's mine. It's a metal one. Most will be plastic or wood at your school. The way you do this is breathe in to the bell, place it in, and turn it a little bit. It's same as with the mouthpiece, and of course that. But a little side note with mutes. Whenever you have a mute in, you have to play louder than you would normally because the mute obstructs your tone, and it makes it harder to push out tone. It makes a cooler tone, in my opinion. Compared to the normal, which is it makes a cooler, more crisp tone, especially with a straight mute. But but you need to play louder to get the same amount of sound because there's something blocking your way, and that goes back to the premise that the trumpet is a directional instrument. It's not like a saxophone that's omnidirectional or that has an arc where the sound is best. The trumpet has a good direction. It comes out straight out the bow, and that's where the sound is best, which is why you face towards the audience and not away from them. As far as cleaning of your instrument, I don't do a whole lot of maintenance, which is why this doesn't look too good. This is silver oxide, the black stuff, and this is just the brass undercoat. This is a silver plated trumpet, or a trumpet that's brass underneath but with silver on the outside. The way you would clean this is probably put it in a bathtub wrapped in a towel and shine it. If you're not so fond of your instrument, or if don't really care if it gets a little scratches, you can just use a rag normally, but I digress. It's really your instrument in general, unless it's a school rental, which we will get to that. But the way to get the most mileage out of your instrument is by treating it the best you can, which is oiling it regularly, not necessarily when you think it needs oil, definitely when you do think it needs oil, because you don't want to try to force the valves down because that scratches them. And you want to oil it regularly, usually before you need oil to do it. And when you actually are cleaning it, you would take the valves out completely. And you would take off this felt thing, this black thing right there. That thing you do not want to get wet if you're washing it in a bathtub. Also, when returning your things, always make note of where the number or marking that signifies the front is. This is a 1. I don't know if you can see it, but it's a 1. And this always faces towards the mouthpiece, or the direction of where the player is facing. So if you looked at it, you would see it when it was pulled out. And that's just basically to keep you from having to turn it. Instruments do not have something like that, and that makes it really a pain because you have to actually try to play it to see if they're in right or not. But back to rental instruments. Now, rental instruments, if your school provides them, you want to treat them with more care than you would your normal instrument. You don't want to be banging this crap around. You want to keep taking care of it because it's not yours. It's the school's, and the school is letting you loan it. And once you're done with it, goes to the next person and the next person. And you never want to get the instrument that's broken or fallen apart. And you don't want to give the next person the instrument that's broken or falling apart. You just don't really want to do that. And it's really not a good way to treat the instruments in general. I mean, the school is nice enough to let you loan out and rent an instrument that you will never play after high school or middle school. And if you break it, then you buy it, at least in most schools, though most schools, at least mine does, they take the instrument back, you pay for it, and they use it as a parts instrument, which is really the worst thing really to have an instrument for, is for parts. I mean, our school has a tuba that someone slammed a screwdriver into the bell of, and that's completely broken. So that's $1,000 or so, probably more than that. That's completely useless now because you can't melt it back together. You have to take the whole thing apart and start over. And now it's just a parts tuba because its valves still work. Everything else about it still works. Just the thing at the end, something right about here, someone hit it with something and put a hole in it, and now it can't play correctly because the air will escape out there and then it won't sound completely correct. But that's my rant on school instruments. Now on to stands. They are usually quite flimsy. They are not usually well supported, and they're meant to hold music. They're not meant to hold weights. They're not supposed to, and you're never supposed to put your weight on them. Like, you never want to lay down on a stand like this, because that's a good way to bend the back of the stand and to break it. You treat the stand like you would an instrument, or you would and if you don't treat your instrument good, then treat it like you would your prized video game controller or something like that. Because especially with school stands, most of them, at least at our school, are not in the best shape. They're usually not in the best shape, as in that they are bent or busted or just graffitied upon. They're not in a good standing, and to put your weight on them just makes it its condition worsen faster. Having instruments and people doing stuff like that to them all the time doesn't increase their lifetime either. But by not mistreating them or using them as a desk, because they are certainly not desks, they will last longer. Other band equipment, of course, include your folder. I mean, this is a Newtown High School Symphonic Band folder. And what you want to do with this is you always want your instrument, your music in here. You never want to leave it somewhere else. And if you're packing up and you don't think you're coming back to it, or you're not coming back to it quickly, then put it in your folder and close your folder. That way, when you're in the rush in the morning, you don't have to stop, grab the piece of paper, or more likely, you're not going to forget the one piece of paper that you left on the stand, and you're just going to grab the folder and go. You can just put the music in there, take the extra 5 seconds, then when you're in the rush in the morning, grab the folder in its entirety, shove it in your book bag if you can, of course. I mean, these are not exactly the smallest things, but then again, it's not a small thing, so it's hard to lose. If it's a small thing, it's the most easy thing to lose. Like, you can lose something like this. That's slide grease. It's easy to lose. But yeah, don't ever, and if you're not in a system that uses folders, you have a folder for your music, or a binder would probably be better if they don't provide music folders. And always, always, always put your music back in that binder or folder when you're done with it. That way you don't show up to class without your music, or show up to class with missing something, or God forbid show up to class without your instrument, which is another thing. You always want your instrument packed up. You never want to leave it outside of its case when you're done playing it. At least leave it in the case, something like this. And this includes other things like bells. Well, not bells, this is mutes, and other things that you might have in there that you might need, such as valve oil. I didn't show you mine before. I use Yamaha for a Bach because the Yamaha is actually probably the best I have, since I'm one of those people that don't oil their valves probably enough, and it's gone about half a year now without me oiling my valves, and they've worked completely fine. And that's just because I use Yamaha. I don't really know why, I don't really know how, but it's worked so far, and I have had no problems. But you never want to do it like that, and I always have extra valve oil in there just in case. But always put your instrument back in your case. At least leave it something like this, and preferably leave it something like with your valve, with all your things ready, closed, latched up, and ready to go, so you can just grab it and go. You don't have to worry about packing it up last minute when you've woken up late. But yeah, that's all the stuff that I would talk about at home. Some etiquette that I would use while in the band room is always looking up at the conductor. The conductor gives you the time. It shows you how fast or how slow to go. This is the time. That's how he tells it. Usually, sometimes he'll give you the time like that with a beat, which is similar to a metronome, which is another thing that if you have the option and you want to take it, you can get yourself a metronome. Though you don't need to, and you can usually get it on something like your phone. But yeah, he is your sense of time. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Something akin to that. If it's anything like this, then yell at them and tell them to make the time more obvious, because if it's something like this, it's hard to tell because the motion is too small. You want something something big, something noticeable. If you're ever in a section and you're the person doing the time, make your signs noticeable. You don't want and of course that's for 4/4 time. 3/4 is something more like 1, 2, 3. No, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Something like that. 2/2 is more just like 1, 2, or 1, 1, 2, 1, 2. 6, 8. I haven't seen a 6/8 conducted. It's more something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't know how it actually is conducted for 6/8. Just disregard that. But yeah, look for your conductor for your time. That's the best way to keep time and keep with your instrument. The problem that most bands face isn't wrong notes, bad articulations, though that is a second usually. It's either bad air, which is weaker air, or not enough air put into your instrument to make it count. And usually that leads to problems with time, usually dragging or going behind the designated beat. But yeah, now we'll go to the high school and I will show you around there.
So this is the band room. It's fairly organized. You see, this is the percussion equipment. You never want to bang on it, never want to touch it really, unless directed by a percussion member. These are the B lockers. These are for the bigger, the medium-sized brass instruments, bigger than a trumpet but smaller than a tuba. And this is more of the orchestra for the very non-existent string section. These is for the drum line of marching band. These are usually open a lot. You don't take anything from them. This is some more percussion things as well as flute and clarinet lockers. Then we come over here. These are the sax and trumpet lockers. You should always have your locker locked at all times if you can, and just so no one takes or touches your instrument. Extra baritones in instruments, those are school owned, so you want to treat those with the most care because you don't want to pay for them. Over here is more larger instrument storage. These are the tuba lockers, and over right here is the tuba closet. That's where a lot of larger things like the basses for the orchestra are as well. Now this is the main area for most people. This is the area, right now it's spread out for COVID reasons. It's not overly hard to manage, just make sure to keep care of it. Do not put your weight on, too much weight on the stands. Like this stand right here, this is bent inward because someone put their full weight on it and it got bent. These stands are fairly old, ranging from 5 years to 30 years old. Like this one right here is probably one of the oldest. But yeah, that's the basics of the band room. Respect the instruments in here. You don't want to break anything and you don't want to move anything unless you know how to move it and have permission to move it. But yeah, that's the band room.